Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Common Discourse weekly podcast. You're joined by me, Varun Prasad, and we're going to get into the swing of having a free-for-all conversation, without any sort of impediments on our freedom of speech, freedom of expression. We want to talk about things. We want to let the conversation flow freely, let the discourse flow freely, let the common man talk. If that's your thing, well, you've come to the right place. And if that's not your thing, you've still come to the right place. Okay, before I get into the show, I thought I'd get some housekeeping done. You can follow me at Paradigm Emerges. That's at PARADIGMS on Twitter and on Gab. The other 2/3 of the TCD crew, the Common Discourse crew, at Boogie Bumper, and Adam J, the voice of reason. You can catch him on Twitter at TEDBROWSKI. I think I've spelt that right. Adam, if you're listening out there and I've stuffed it up, I'm sorry, mate. But yeah, that's at Ted Dabrowski. To keep you updated, we are working on developing another website, a new and improved one. We did have a previous one. The website will have some articles posted by us. We encourage our listeners and other contributors to post their articles if they feel so inclined, and other content as well, videos, podcasts, whatever. Well, that will be the sort of the direction that we're going in. It is the Common Discourse after all. And also that our flagship monthly show where all three of us get together and have a bit of a talk, that's coming up soon, our July episode. I'll keep you posted on that one. Tonight's show, I'm going to keep it short and sweet again. I'm not going to get into too much today. I'm going to be sticking in Europe and the things that are happening in the EU. So just to, take us to that, let's play some EU music. Yes, I call that the EU music because in my eyes the EU is failing on many, many counts. Now, one of the stories that I wanted to start off today is just a sickening report. It really is. But the plight of the victims must be shared with everybody. We must, show the world that when authorities censor speech and put gag orders on news reports, then those very authorities are responsible for, any sort of future attacks on their citizens that may take place. Because by covering up the story and the truth, they're complicit accessories in these heinous crimes. And just last week, I spoke about the sort of crisis talks between EU member states regarding the issues of migrants, and Merkel's party, teetering on the edge. And as a response to that backlash on the issue, she has, toughened the rhetoric on her stance on migration. I mentioned that these talks seem to be an agreement to reach an agreement, because what better way is there to slow talk an issue that is critical to keep votes, but against what can only be described as some kind of grand plan of social engineering. So I thought I'll start with this article. Migrant beheads 1-year-old girl in Germany. Merkel bans media reporting. According to eyewitnesses, the 33-year-old suspect, Mortala Madal, beheaded his 1-year-old daughter in front of a horrified crowd of commuters at Jungfernstieg station on Thursday, April 12th, and then stabbed his German girlfriend, the mother of the child. April 12th, this happened, what's it, July now? We're hearing about it this week. This is just disturbing. It really is it's a disturbing story. Because if we read about the media coverage of this, Merkel's government have been under intense pressure in recent months regarding the open borders policy that is responsible for millions of Muslim migrants settling in Germany during the last 3 years. Now, wrap your head around that, okay? Not tens, not hundreds, not thousands, not tens of thousands, not even hundreds of thousands. millions of Muslim migrants. Now, if you listened to the show last week, you remember I brought up the UNESCO website and was quite shocked to actually see that UNESCO was they were quite open with the impacts of established communities, where migration is taking place. These communities suffer, whether it's cultural dilution or a breakdown of social cohesion, whether it's employment or rise in unemployment. There are always some impacts, and that's just with normal migration patterns. Now you imagine what millions of migrants coming into a country would do. And not only millions of any old people, we're talking about millions of people that adhere to a culture which is, quite frankly, incompatible with many of the ideals of the host nation. Okay? Now, that's not to say that all of them are like that, or even a majority of them like that. Probably a majority of them are probably very nice, law-abiding citizens, just like you, just like me. But we can't escape the fact that they belong to an ideology that is fundamentally, opposed to the West. And that the minority that comes over who do sort of practice those, who are part of that fringe sort of extremist elements, that's a significant minority. Because if it wasn't, it wouldn't be front and center of migration talks. Anyway, getting back to this article. Many Germans believe the government issued a blanket ban on reporting this story because they believe it will turn the public mood against the government and represent the final nail in Merkel's political coffin. German authorities have also been ordered to clamp down on independent bloggers caught sharing the damning footage. When Hamburg blogger Heinrich Cordweiner posted the video on Facebook and his own YouTube channel, a police investigation was launched. Cordweiner's apartment was searched by police and his personal belongings were confiscated. Cordweiner says he and his roommate were awakened at 6:45 a.m. by a squad of prosecutors and police officers seeking access to their home. When they were denied, they forcibly gained access by drilling the door lock. The Christian gospel singer who recorded the video on his cell phone has also had his home raided and personal belongings confiscated. Police claim they are operating under the orders to confiscate material in order to protect the rights of the victims. The rights of the victims? The victims are dead. I mean, the fact that Merkel has put a ban on the reports so as to not turn the public mood against the government, it reflects the fact that she is not sincere to the sentiments of the people. And she's merely sort of placating or appeasing the masses with tough words but soft actions when it comes to migration. I mean, it's soft actions on the problems but tough action on those who are actually trying to help. I mean, as we can see, who are they busting here? They're busting the people who are trying to spread the news, expose the problems that are happening in society. Merkel's completely detached from that. Juncker's completely detached from that. All these EU elites are completely detached from that because they're sitting in their ivory towers, judging people who are facing these issues in daily life. Parents who are sending their children their children are getting brutally bashed or bullied by children of immigrants because the culture is incompatible. But here's the really disturbing part of the story. Let me just scroll down a little bit. It seems the German government gag order extends beyond the media. A request by the AfD faction number 21/12844 regarding the nature of the child's injury was redacted with the details blacked out before the civil law court replied. Even the German judiciary are going out of their way to ensure that the barbaric crimes of Muslim migrants are kept hidden from the German public. And that is disturbing. Even the German civil courts have redacted the details of the murder of the 1-year-old girl. Which means the Federal Court of Germany has extended its constitutional power to overshadow civil court proceedings. Now this is part of the German civil law system. I mean, But it does make you wonder to what lengths this vested power can be used in the personal interests of the elite rather than the nation. I mean, for all the chants of democracy and the love of free trade blocs such as the EU that we hear sort of, emanating from left-wing activists, this does not appear to have a very democratic ring to it. When you read like the Washington Post online and it's underneath it, it's got that little tag. It says democracy dies in darkness. Well, it's true. Democracy does die in darkness. If the media is not going to report sincerely, well, the media is complicit in the death of democracy. I'll go so far as saying that every action we see in the EU seems that the Brussels is actually quite apathetic to democracy. I mean, Germany had an established legal system before democracy was ordained within its political structure. But Germany's run basically by a civil law system that precedes democracy. So I mean, it's a system that's very easy to usurp. Or so that's the way I see it, at least. I mean, I know a lot of European countries are similar. I mean, you've got German civil law, you've got French codified law. They're different from common law systems that's adopted in many Western countries like America, Australia. Anyway, speaking of an undemocratic, authoritarian, and totalitarian EU dictatorship, let's shift gears and head on over to the UK, where every attempt is being made to stall the Brexit process. Some cry betrayal, while others reserve judgment. Initial Brexiteer reaction to the Chequers proposal. Now, Chequers proposal was, if many of you don't know, that Theresa May had to. She's found herself in a bit of a deadlock. Brexit's coming close, and there's still no deal on the table. There were two previous deals that were rejected by the EU. So she's come together. She's brought some people together and had a bit of a meeting at her residential. I don't think it was her residence, actually. Some kind of holiday home or something like that. Anyway, at a place called Chequers in England. So I'm going to go through this whole Brexit issue for the rest of the show because it's quite damning. Where am I? It's worth mentioning that the plan has been rubbished by not only some hardline Brexiteers within the UK, but also by Merkel. I think also by Juncker. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I know Merkel has rubbished it. And that to me indicates that the proposals that are going to be taken to Brussels will pretty much be pronounced dead on arrival. It appears that the EU has no intention of being told what the English want to do with their own sovereignty. And funny that, we were just talking about democracy dying in darkness. Democracy does indeed die in darkness, and apparently under the shadow of the descending jackboot of the EU. But anyway, let's look at some of the points from the proposal that was agreed upon at the recently held Chequers summit that I've just been talking about. Establishment of a free trade area for goods to avoid friction at the border, protect jobs and livelihoods, and ensure both sides meet their commitments to Northern Ireland and Ireland. Now, this is a very important point, and I need to labour it a little bit to understand what's going on with this Brexit issue. I'm not 100% sure if everyone's up to scratch with it, but Theresa May in the last few days has been accused of backstabbing or betraying, Brexiteers. So I'll tell you, let me outline the conundrum that she finds herself in. Okay. Theresa May's sudden backflip from promising a harder Brexit to a softer approach, it kind of hinges on what's happened in the past, what's happened last year. Remember that May had called a snap election confident that she will be a successful. Well, it proved disastrous for her, and this was last year. This was about a year ago, maybe a year and a bit. Yeah, it proved disastrous for her, and in order for her to hold on to power, she needed support from the Democratic Unionist Party of Ireland, right? So I think there was 10 MPs from the DUP that gave their support. This was the deal that she had to cut so she can get the 326 seats that she needed to hold on to power. So when you take that into consideration, it's no wonder that Brexit talks have stalled for so long, and why at this crucial last minute, May seems to have sort of backflipped on certain policy areas that weren't in line with the wishes of Brexiteers. So let me just get to a couple of paragraphs here. The leader of the DUP, that's the Democratic Unionist Party, has warned that her party will withdraw its support for Theresa May's government if it adopts a Brexit deal that sees Northern Ireland treated differently from the rest of the UK. Arlene Foster said ensuring Northern Ireland maintains the same rules and regulations as Britain was a red line, which if crossed would lose the Conservatives the critical backing of her 10 MPs. It comes as cabinet ministers are still struggling to find a solution to fulfil two of Miss May's key Brexit pledges, keeping the Irish border open and leaving the EU's customs union. So what does that all actually mean? Well, here's the thing. If the UK leaves the trading bloc, then there will be a need to put a stronger border up with Northern Ireland, separating it from the rest of the UK, because Northern Ireland will still be a member state of the EU, and this will cause trade sort of frictions across the border of Northern Ireland and the UK, and that's the red line that Arlene Foster has clearly indicated cannot be crossed, because essentially Northern Ireland will then be treated differently from the rest of the UK, which is Northern Ireland's biggest market. That red line means that the DUP will withdraw its support from Theresa May. And, that would mean that along with Theresa May, the Conservative Party will collapse. And the only way out of this stalemate is to keep the borders open by subjecting the UK to some of the trade laws in the EU's customs union. So in other words, May, she's beholden to the DUP and the EU in order to keep hold of the power that she currently has. And to that end, she's sort of reneged on her earlier promises of, Brexit means Brexit. Now, it's quite the conundrum. She's really stuck between a rock and a hard place. I mean, if she loses the support of the DUP, her party collapses, and the whole Brexit movement will be thrown into turmoil again, because we don't know who will come in. You can have a very anti, Brexit party taking hold in England, or the whole situation can just fall on its head. Let me just get back to this article. Okay, so point number 2 to take here: the UK and EU are to agree to a common rulebook for all goods, including agri-foods, which is agricultural goods and agricultural foods, with British ministers committing in a treaty to ongoing harmonisation with Brussels rules necessary to provide for frictionless trade at ports and the border with Ireland. Okay, so all that in what I've just explained about Ireland, you can see what kind of a hindrance it is. It really does seem that England is or the UK is beholden to the DUP of all the parties. Who would have thought? Also, under this proposal, Parliament would have the ability to choose not to incorporate future rules, but accepting there would be consequences for trade. I mean, what does that mean? It just means that pretty much says that the UK will be held to ransom by the EU. Now remember, this policy hasn't even reached the EU yet. This is May's proposal, and this proposal has already been rubbished by some Eurocrats, okay? So when I was saying before that, democracy does die in darkness, and it seems to die under the shadow of the jackboot of the EU, you think about it. I mean, The UK is bending over backwards for the EU here, and they've already rubbished this. I mean, what kind of control does the EU want from the UK? When will they say, okay, yeah, that's fine, we'll go with that? Is it about retribution? Total control? What is it with the EU? They've just gone crazy. They're absolutely crazy with power. Regulatory flexibility for services, with the UK recognising that would mean neither side enjoying current levels of access to each other's markets. See, the EU chooses when to be pro-free trade and when to be anti-free trade. I mean, how much have we heard lately of the constant bickering by EU heads about the market trade restrictions that Trump is implementing? I don't know, not so much of a problem here though. Don't comply with what the EU wants equals trade restrictions. All of a sudden, we're in trade war land. Agreement of a common rulebook on state aid, preventing either side from subsidizing their own industries, with cooperation between competition watchdogs on either side of the English Channel. Look, that sounds good. A commitment to maintaining high environmental, climate change, social, employment and consumer protection standards. Of course, what kind of free trade blocking, progressive agreement would not include climate change. But it's these last 2 points here that pretty much lay out the fact that there really is no Brexit under this proposal. The UK under this proposal is still under the control of a large chunk of laws that will come from Brussels. The UK must apply EU tariffs to goods that will enter the EU, and this in itself will sort of indirectly affect the ability of the UK to put on its own tariffs. Let's read them. Establishment of a joint institutional framework to oversee UK-EU agreements, with the UK agreeing to pay due regard to EU case law in areas where common rulebook applies. That's pretty much saying that the EU will have, jurisprudence or jurisdiction in the UK. So what does it mean for the UK to actually leave the EU? And on top of that, a facilitated customs agreement to remove the need for customs checks by treating the UK and EU as if a combined customs territory, with the UK applying the EU's tariffs and trade policy policy for goods intended for the bloc, but able to control its own tariffs and trade for the domestic market. What does all that mean? I mean, with so many laws and legal control coming from Brussels, coming from the EU, because if UK is still going to be part of the customs union of the European Union, they're still going to have to be subject to the laws that come with being part of that group. The customs union is pretty much a blanket set of duties that apply to all member states, but to be part of that, which was seen as a privilege, which was the big calling card into the EU 10-12 years ago, was reduced tariffs and harmonization of AHEC codes and HS codes. So if the UK is still going to be subject to the laws that come along with being part of the customs union, and then there will be a joint institutional framework to oversee UK-EU agreements, with the UK agreeing to pay due regard to EU case law, how much can we say that Brexit has actually happened? People call it a Brino, a Brexit in name only, and I think that name is pretty fitting. And the other fact that I wanted to point out here is that it's being sold by Theresa May as this proposal allowing the UK to have an independent trade policy with the potential to join countries including Japan, Australia, New Zealand and Canada in comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's the TPP. The old sort of trading bloc that was forming, and Trump, I think it was one of his first big moves. It wasn't very much long after he got elected that he pulled out of it. Yeah, the UK will be allowed to trade with these countries because they'll be forming their own little bloc. Yeah, I'm not sure how much they can make in individual contact with these countries once that trading bloc is formed. They'll be dealing with a body that represents these countries, Yeah, effectively, the sovereignty of these nations will sort of slowly be eroded away, by the sort of head honchos of the TPP. But this is meant to be some kind of selling point. But you'll notice over here that of all the countries mentioned, the US isn't there. The US cannot make, the UK cannot make deals with the US. And I'll just bring you onto this article now. And, she being Theresa May, allegedly said the only way to keep trade flowing freely with Europe is to adopt EU regulations on all goods, adding that would stop us accepting goods from the US which don't comply with the rules. Now, of course, Number 10 rubbished the reports and insisted that Mrs. May's message to the cabinet has been misinterpreted. Now, the PM's spokesman said it's categorically not true that we will not be able to strike a trade deal with the US. But how much of this is to be believed? Because the EU Customs Union is still applicable under the proposal. A document sent to senior ministers made mention of the fact that striking a deal with the US will be difficult because the UK will be seeking complete harmonization of goods with the EU. So I'll scroll down to that part of the actual article, and here we can see Downing Street sent Brexit briefing papers to senior ministers today ahead of a summit at Chequers tomorrow, where they will finally agree the government's position on customs. The documents say Britain will make an upfront choice to commit by treaty to ongoing harmonisation with EU rules on goods, according to the Spectator magazine. They add that staying to European standards would not allow the UK to accommodate a likely ask from the US in a future trade deal. That is because US negotiators would probably demand that Britain start allowing imports of American goods which fall foul of EU regulations. Tory MP Lucy Allen said of the reports, "This is not Brexit." Jacob Rees-Mogg, boss of the powerful European research group, added, "This common rulebook means that we are essentially a vassal state." And Nadine Dorries said, "What's the point if we can't free trade with global giants?" It's absolutely true. I thought that was the whole point. The whole point of Brexit was to be able to break out from the clutches of the EU. The EU wants to sink its claws into every member state and just inject its poison, erode away on their sovereignty, and just slowly take control. Now, if the UK cannot implement directly its own tariffs, because there's an after effect of the tariffs that it needs to implement, the EU tariffs that it needs to implement. If the UK is not allowed to deal directly with the US, and if they're allowed to deal only with trading blocks such as the TPP, rising TPP body or network, what kind of Brexit are we talking about here? There essentially is no Brexit. I wanted to lastly bring up the soft Brexit agreement in 6 bullet points, just to make it quite clear what the pushback is from a lot of the people you'd be hearing. If you're on Twitter, you'll be seeing, the likes of Nigel Farage and even, the so-called alt-right crew of, PJW, talking a lot about being betrayed by Theresa May. Here are the points that I think really sort of illustrate what they're talking about. 1. Common Rulebook would keep British producers bound by EU rules on goods, including farmers. Now remember, agricultural goods were one of the points of contention, one of the reasons why Brexit occurred in the first place. There was so much pushback to the control of what can be grown, where it can be grown, who can sell it, who can't sell it. Now, obviously, migration was the biggest factor. There's no doubt about that. But these were massive issues, So if the EU's still going to be in control of British farmers and agricultural goods, you straight away knocked out one massive issue, Parliament would oversee these rules, but deciding not to abide by them would have consequences. And again, you're being held to ransom. What are they saying? They're just putting a gun to their head and telling them what to do? Because that's essentially what it is. Do as we please. Do as we say, sorry. Joint UK-EU Joint Committee to oversee and rule on disputes, but these would not be settled these would be settled based on more than 40 years of EU laws. EU laws, not UK laws, EU laws. Britain to effectively stay in the EU's customs union, described as a combined customs territory to avoid hard border with Ireland. Like I mentioned before, Theresa May is beholden to the DUP, to Northern Ireland, to the EU. Because, if she does not put up that border to her northern neighbours, the only way for her to do that is to be part of the customs union. And if she does put up that border, then she's essentially cut off Northern Ireland from its biggest market, which is the UK. And obviously, in retaliation, they're going to withdraw support for her party, and she'll collapse. And the British Conservatives will collapse. The British Conservative Party will collapse. Boy, oh boy, what a mess. Britain to be responsible for collecting EU tariffs and implementing EU trade policy for goods passing through the UK. So they're pretty much like a conveyor belt now, for the EU, doing the dirty work, implementing, tariffs on behalf of the EU. What if they want to do enforce some tariffs of their own? What would that do to their trade policies or their trade sort of, potential opportunities that come up? There's almost like a double layer of tariffs now. Britain to leave EU rules for services, with banks losing crucial EU passporting rights that allows them to sell their services across Europe. Well, here we go again. Trade restrictions on the service sector. It seems that this whole war against trade war that we see, it seems hollow and shallow when it's coming from the EU, because they can jump to the gun and implement it as much as they need to. But as soon as it's done somewhere else, they look down upon it. As soon as Trump mentions anything about tariffs, anything about trade restrictions, they look down upon it like it's the worst thing that someone could ever do. Like they've just murdered a baby. I shouldn't say that actually. But you know what I'm trying to get to. Well, that's the plight of Brexit at the moment. So, England has been betrayed. Theresa May, they call her Theresa the Appeaser. She's she's sold out. She's sold out the Brexiteers, within England, within her own camp as well. And look, there were reports that there'll probably be a wide-scale resignation from the party of many hardline Brexiteers. But it didn't really kind of happen. I think people do understand that there are some complex issues that need to be dealt with. But the issue over here, the problem that can possibly arise, that what if they lose the next election? And what if another party does come, who are anti-Brexit, more pro-EU? What happens in that scenario? Because all the there's nothing that needs to be changed. It's just very easy to get back into the EU because the laws, the trading blocks, everything is still there. The only thing that UK has got now is that they've got control of their borders back and migration. They have more of a say on migration and who comes into the country and who doesn't. So aside from that, they've pretty much lost everything else. They pretty much, nothing's changed. So if another party was to come in, there wouldn't be much policy changes. It wouldn't be, years and years of talks on what needs to be changed, what needs to be tweaked, how we can get in. No, it's just a boom. Just flick the switch on, and we're back in. And that's a bit of a danger. Anyway, that's the show for tonight. I really wanted to concentrate on the Brexit thing. There are other things going on, of course. We've had the the election of the far left president in Mexico, and the problems that might pose for Trump, because he has said that he's going to be soft on migration, soft on the war against drugs, which means the cartels might get more of a stronghold, more of a market within the US. That can turn messy, but we'll see how that works out. That's just not something that I can talk about tonight. I also, what's that New York girl's name? I forget her name. Cortez, Alexandria Cortez, the socialist in New York, 28-year-old. I was going to talk about her as well, but I think she's copped enough flack for one lifetime. So look, I'll leave it here tonight. I'll remind you can follow me at Paradigms Emerge on Twitter and on Gad. You can follow my two friends, Boogie Bumper, at Boogie Bumper, and at Ted Dabrowski, the other 2/3 of the Common Discourse Podcast. I'll be back next week with another show. And until then, take care. Keep talking. Exercise your freedom of expression. Don't let anyone shut you down. Good night, guys.